So before we start building out our own web components and before we take a dive into StencilJS, I first want to talk about what web components are. And if I go here to webcomponents.org, they also briefly explain what web components are. And web components are a set of web platform APIs that allow you to create new custom, reusable, encapsulated HTML tags to use in web pages and web apps. Now, these custom components and widgets build on the web component standard, and they will work across modern browsers. And they can also be used within any JavaScript library or a framework that works with HTML. Now you can also see the specifications. So web components are based on custom elements. They are based on the shadow DOM. Also, they use ES modules, and they also need an HTML template. But we will go into detail about that later. Now, first of all, I want to show you an example of what web components would look like. And if you take a look here, this custom message, as you can see here on this code pen, this custom message is a web component, and it basically looks like just a regular HTML tag, but not a HTML tag like P or other HTML tags that you know, but this custom HTML tag that you as a developer gets to decide what the name of this tag will be. And you can see down here what this web component will look like. You can also see that you can style this component, and in here you can see the source code on how this web component was built. And you can see that the developer of this web component used vanilla JS to create a web component like this. And that takes me to the next part. So web components can be built with regular or with vanilla JS. That is no problem. And there are also many other frameworks that let you build web components. Now, I'm a little bit opinionated, and I will use StencilJS just because we've used StencilJS at work before, and I've also attended a hackathon 3 years ago where we had to use web components, and I just got along with StencilJS with their whole documentation and everything. I got along with StencilJS better. But you can also use, of course, Polymer and other, I'm sure there are many more other frameworks out there that let you build web components, but in my case, we will just use StencilJS. And if you go to their documentation, it looks clean, it looks modern. And later on, we will see that if you're familiar with React, everything looks very familiar. But we will get into that later on as well. You can see that StencilJS also uses lifecycle methods, they kind of remind you of those lifecycle methods that you already know from React. For example, component will render, component will update, component did mount, just lifecycle methods like that. What I also like about StencilJS is they are using JSX, so that as well is looks very familiar from when you're coming from React. They also use TypeScript, so everything will compile or transpile down to JavaScript, and you can even transpile it down to ES5 or to older JavaScript. So if for some reason you still have to support IE11, then you will be all good if you're using TypeScript here. So now that you know the basics of web components and StencilJS, I would suggest that we would jump right into building our first project with StencilJS. In order to create a new stencil project, I will need a recent version of Node.js and also npm, and you can take a look if you've got that installed by typing in node v or npm. I believe it's v as well. All right, so I've got Node and I also got npm installed. It's not I think 16 might be the last version, but I think 14 is also okay. Just make sure to have a newer version of Node installed. Now I'm going to change the directory to my projects directory. I've got this projects directory right here, and I'm going to create a new stencil project by saying npm init stencil. And now it's going to ask me if I want to create a component or an app. Now, for this tutorial, I'm going to create a component. The project name should be stencil. Let's call it StencilJS YT tutorial. I'm going to confirm, and it has created my project. Now I'm going to cd into that. And I'm going to open up VS Code by typing in code. Okay, so now we are here within our VS Code, and I've got my project right here. So if I take a look, I will see a source directory, and in there I will have my components, and I also have my index HTML, some index TypeScript, and we will get into the details later. But first of all, I will have to say npm install, and then I can say npm start, and that will start my project. So npm I. Now that it has installed all of the dependencies, I can now say npm start, and that will start the development server. And if I now pull up my Chrome, I can see here I'm on localhost 3333, and you can see that it says hello world, I'm Stencil, don't call me a framework JS. So I apologize because I've called it a framework before. Now let's go back to VS Code, and first of all, I would like to take a look at what we've got within that project. So we've got the package JSON, and everything should be quite familiar in here. And I would start to take a look at this index HTML right here. So this is just a regular index HTML with the basic HTML structure that we all know. It has a head and a body, and within the head we've got meta, and we also got the title. Now we've also got two script tags right here. One script tag is with type module, so it will import the JavaScript modules, and the second script tag says no module, and it will just import this JS file right here. And the second script tag, this is for older browsers, for legacy browsers, like for example IE 11, and because IE 11 doesn't support any JavaScript modules, so it wouldn't be able to load those. That's why you need those two scripts, just to make sure that also legacy browsers are also supported. The next thing that you will see right here is another HTML tag, and we've taken a look at this before. So now you know a little bit where this comes from, but it looks like an HTML tag, but it actually is a custom web component, and it says my component, and this my component has multiple, or in this case two parameters. One is called first and the other one is called last, and we will pass a string down to that parameter, and then we also have this closing tag right here. Now this component is defined within our source directory, and within that source directory we have another directory called components, and within that components directory there are also all of our web components stored. So components has a subdirectory called my component, which defines this right here. And this directory has a CSS file. So once you create a new component, StencilJS will give you the option to create a CSS file as well as the other files. So you've got that CSS file right here. You've also got an end-to-end testing file, which is very neat. It also comes with a unit testing file, and there is the bread and butter of our web component. It's the mycomponent.tsx. So as you can see, we're using TypeScript here, and within this component we are returning JSX, which I really like because I know JSX already from React. Now we can go through this component from top to bottom. So we're importing all our dependencies, and the first thing that we can see here is this component, or it says add component. Now what this is, it's a decorator, and decorators are used to collect all metadata about a component. For example, add component declares a new component. And if you come here to StencilJS.com and go to the documentation to Components API, then you can see a list of all of the decorators that StencilJS provides. And for example, we're taking a look at this component decorator, and this declares a new web component. So if we take a look here, this decorator is kind of the entry point for your web component. In here you will define the name or the tag. So because we've named this my component, that's why we can use the name my component within our index.html, right? Now this decorator component, it requires an object, and this object requires at least this property called tag. So that means that you will have to give a name to your component, and everything down here, that is optional. For example, the style URL, where you pass the URL to your style sheet, that is optional because maybe you don't even need a style sheet for one of your components. That might be the case as well. And the last property is shadow, that defines the shadow DOM. And if you hover over this property, then there will also be a definition or a little bit a documentation about this property. And as you can see here by the question mark, that means that it's optional, and it says that if true, the component will use the native shadow DOM encapsulation. It will fall back to scoped if the browser does not support shadow DOM natively. For example, I believe that IE 11 doesn't support the shadow DOM natively, and it defaults to false. So if you don't set it to true, it will default to false. Next, you can see a syntax which is kind of familiar from React as well. So you export a component, and within that component, you can define some props, just like a React component that will receive some props. You can define the props that your web component should get. So for example, here we've defined the first name, which is first, and it receives a string. As you can see here within your index.html, that's this prop right here. Second prop will be middle, which is not used by the index.html right here. So it's not a required prop. And the last prop is this last, which also takes a string, and as you can see here, it's given a string. Now you can also define methods within your component. So you can just define a regular method that returns something. And the last thing is the render method, which will then render all of your JSX, just like you know it from React. So this is very similar to React, where you also have this render method that returns JSX. And in here, you can still call this method that you've defined within your component. And this also, it looks like React, but it looks like the older React, where you still used class components, so you can access your methods with this.getText. So if you want to edit our web component, I could say, instead of stencil, that it would say Lee, middle, I think it was middle, this.middle, let me say L4. And the last would be, don't call me a, now let me change this, don't call me a developer, which wouldn't make any sense, but I'm a YouTuber. All right. Now, I've saved this HTML file. Now let me go back to the browser, and you can see that it also hot reloaded. I could just open this site without reloading. So now it says, hello world, I'm Lee L4, don't call me a developer, I'm a YouTuber, which doesn't make any sense, but that's okay. I'm a YouTuber that also develops, or I'm a developer that also YouTubes. It doesn't matter. So that was the overview of how a component is built. There are many, many more things to discover, and there are many more methods and decorators that StencilJS offers, but it would be too much to get into detail into all of them. I would just recommend you checking out the documentation from Stencil. If you would ever need to know why or when to use any lifecycle hook, everything is documented very well in here. And now the next thing that we want to do is we want to create our own component, and we will do that in the next video. All right, now let's create our own web component with StencilJS. In order to do that, I will create a new terminal here within VS Code, and I will type in npm run generate. And now it will ask me for the component tag name. Now, when you create new components, the tag names should always be unique. So you will always need a unique tag name. So for example, you shouldn't call it video because there's already a video HTML tag. So I would recommend that you use a prefix. So just to be sure that the component doesn't exist yet, my prefix would be L4. So feel free to use any prefix that you want. And just for the sake of this tutorial, to keep it very simple as possible, is I want to create a button, right? So I'm just gonna call it L4 button. And now I can choose which files are supposed to be generated as well. So if you take a look at this directory here, you got a CSS, so a end-to-end testing and a unit testing file. For me, it's okay to just use the style sheet, so I can go up and down with the arrow and select and deselect with a space bar. So in my case, I do not want the end-to-end testing, and all right, I will leave the unit testing, and that's enough for me. Style sheet is okay, and I will accept with enter. And now the following files have been generated. And if I take a look here on the left-hand side of my project, if I go to components, I can see here my component, and I can also see this L4 button right here. And if I click this L4 button, I will see that it has generated a TSX file. It has automatically named this component for me, so I didn't have to do it myself. It also added the correct URL for my style sheet, and it also has created a new class for me that returns this JSX right here. And as you can see, this component doesn't have any props yet. It doesn't have any methods. It just has this host element, and it has this slot tag right here. And this slot tag is kind of like a placeholder. So you can pass children, just like you can pass children down a React component. You can also pass children down to this component right here. And then this slot will be replaced by the children. So let me just do that very quickly, just to show you, just to give you an example. So I would say L4 button, and now I can add some children in here. I can, for example, add a real button that says click me. I will add a break. Now I will save it, switch back here, and now I can see that it has added the button, and it has just rendered my HTML button that I used here. So if I go to the developer tools, I can see that my button is right here, and now if you expand this tag, you can see here that there is the shadow DOM. So that's what the shadow DOM is actually all about. So you got this button, you got this tag right here on the surface. So on the surface, it looks like a regular HTML tag. But if you go deeper, then you can see here, that's the shadow DOM. And underneath that, there lies this regular HTML tag, which is in my case just the button, and it says click me. So by using slots, you can create placeholders, sort of. Now the last thing that I want to talk about is this host element, and as you can see here in the explanation, the host element is a functional component that can be used at the root of the render function to set attributes and event listeners to the host element itself. And this is basically comparable to the React fragment, and so it's just like the root element, but it won't be rendered to the DOM. So it has a host element in here, but if I take a look at the DOM, then it's not there anymore. So let's go and create this button. First of all, I'm going to delete this button in here because I want my L4 button tag to render a button, and I don't want to pass a button as a child. So I'm going to delete that. And in here, within my button TSX, I'm going to say button. Now the text of the button, or the content of the button, should be defined within a prop. So I want to be able to say, for example, button text, and say click me from in here. I want to pass down a string. So I would have to define that here within my component. Now I would have to say add, because I'm using a decorator, say prop, call that method. Now I would type the name of the property, which in this case is button text. And since this is TypeScript, I will have to define the type of this prop, and it will be of type string. Now you can see here that I used the camel case here for the prop within my component. So this is button text in camel case. But if I use the prop in my HTML tag, then I will use this kebab case right here. And now I want to display those props. Now I want to display this prop right here within my button. So I will say this dot, and since we're working with TypeScript, I get a recommendation what method I would use, and I would use my prop right here, button text. Now I would save it, and now I can go back to the browser and take a look if everything worked. And as you can see here, my button is still working. So now let's add some functionality to our component. For example, I want my button to go to Google every time I click on it. So this would be a very useful tool for every developer. Just click this button and Google something. So first of all, we can define a method, and we'll just call it handle click. And within that handle click method, I will say window open, and I will say google.com focus. Right now, I will add that method to my button, and that is done very easily by saying on click, add this the handle click, and now we can test our button once again. And now it has refreshed automatically. Now I can just click here, and as you can see, it opened up Google for me. So the functionality is working. Now let's add some styling to our button as well. And to style my button, I will just go here to this L4 button.css. Now it's very important to know that with the shadow DOM enabled, which we have here and which would work on all of the newer browsers, with the shadow DOM enabled, that means that elements within the shadow DOM are all scoped. So if you define a style, for example, if you say button, and if I would add a background red, then that background red would only apply to my web component, since that is part of, since that is within the shadow DOM. If you take a look here at the developer tools, if you go back here, you can see that this button right here is below the shadow DOM. So that means it's scoped. So any style that you would define within your CSS file right here would only apply to all of those buttons underneath that shadow DOM. So we can also add another button within our HTML file, but that other button wouldn't be affected by the CSS that we defined within our web component in here. So that is another huge advantage of our web components and our shadow DOM that we are using compared to just regular HTML tags. Now, as for the styling of the button, we're gonna keep it really simple. First of all, I'm going to unset everything. Now I want the button to have a background with this hex code, which is a sort of a green button. Now I want the button to have a padding of 15 pixels and 25 pixels. Also a border radius, font size should be 18 pixel. I would also add a font family, just very basic, sans serif, cursor pointer. What else do we need? I want the color to be white. And that's basically it, right? A very basic and simple button. Now let me switch back to my browser, add refresh, and for some reason it didn't quite work. Now let me investigate on why that is, and I will come back in a second. So it did work, and just the only problem that I had was that I didn't restart my my development server after I generated a new component. So every time you generate a new component, make sure to restart your server just to make sure that all of the changes are there. So that's what my button will look like, and it's fully functional. If I click on it, I will switch to Google and it takes all of the CSS. Now, just as a test, just to make sure that all of the stylings are actually scoped, I will add another button tag right below my button, and I will call it or it should say new button, whatever, just to make sure that the stylings I've added to my web component do not affect any other components on this HTML, right? And here you can see it. Here's my button. It says click me, and below it, it says new button, because this button right here is not scoped within the shadow DOM, right? It's just a regular button right here on the DOM. So those are the very basics of web components. That's how they actually work. Now, in the beginning, I said that a major advantage of web components is that you can reuse them in any project. And how to actually reuse them in any project, that I will show you in the next step. So stay tuned. All right, now this is where we left off, and as you can see here, we've got our two web components here in within our DOM, and we've got this regular HTML tag, which is just a button. And I've created this web component right here, and now let's say that I want to reuse that web component within another project. If I want to do that, then the recommended way by Stencil is to publish an npm package. And publishing a npm package might seem like a daunting task if you've never done it before, but it's actually very straightforward. So I will show you the process of publishing an npm package, and after that we will reuse that web component in another project to make sure that what we're trying to do actually works. So before publishing an npm package, it's usually best practice to test the package locally first. And in order to do that, I will create a new directory within my projects directory. So I will say make dir npm package test project. And I will cd into that. I will open it with VS Code. And in here, I just, first of all, just want to create a new index.html and add the basic HTML structure. And now here's a little recommendation if you haven't installed it already. So if you're just trying to test single HTML files or projects like that don't have a framework or anything, then I would recommend an extension called Live Server. As you can see here, that's the extension. So, and once you've installed that, then you've got this button down here where it says go live. And if you say go live, then it will open up a port on your local host and it will show your index.html file. Right now it's empty, but if I added some text to it, then it would also add hot reload. So let's say within the body, I would add a div and it would say test. Now I can go back and here I can see that it added test. So that's pretty neat. If you haven't installed it, go install Live Server. I've got it right here within my project. So now the task is to load my web component into this new project that I have right here. I'm gonna pull up my integrated terminal within VS Code. Now I want to install my StencilJS project as an npm package locally. How can I do that? Well, I can say npm install, just like I usually do. Now I want to add the path to the directory where my project is located. So I will go up one level, I will say slash, and now my project is called StencilJS YT tutorial. And if I hit enter, I might have misspelled it. Let's try again. npm I, go up, say stencil. Okay, so it, for some reason it seemed to work. So it says package not found, but then it updated a package. And if I go here, now I can see that I've also got a node modules folder, and I've also got the source where I've got my components, where I've got my button, I've got my component, and so on and so on. So it seemed to work. Let's hope for the best. Now the next thing that I need to do is I need to import my module, and for that I'm going to use the script tag. Let's say type module, say src, and now I need a different source, of course, because I need the node modules. I will go to StencilJS YT tutorial. In here I've got my dist folder. In there I got that folder again, and in here now I can use my ESM module, this right here, close the tag, and now I should be able to load my web component within this new project. So let's try it. Say L4 button, and I will give it a button text. It says L4 button. Now let's switch back to Chrome and take a look if it worked. And as you can see here, it worked. So I've got my web component loaded into this new project, just like I would expect it to be. So this means that my npm package is fully working, and I can now publish it to the npm registry. So let me switch back to VS Code. I can close that testing project, and now I've got my project where I've built my web component in here. So let me just stop the server for a second and empty the console. So creating an npm package is actually pretty straightforward, but you have to be registered at npm. So you can just go to npmjs.com and click sign up if you're not a member yet, or you can sign in if you're already a member. And on the console, you also have to be logged in. So you can type in npm login, and they will ask for your credentials. My name is Lee, that's why I'm called Bruce Lee. Password is secret. And you can all see my email address. Then they will send you a one-time password, which is being sent to your email. And you enter that, and now you're logged in. And now that all that is left is for you to say npm publish, and you can hit enter. And in the preparation for this video, I've already tried to publish it, and then I've deleted my package, and now it says that I cannot publish a package with the same name for 24 hours. See, it's forbidden. They've got a security policy, so you should be aware of that. That's why I have to rename my package, and that's what I also want to show you, how you can name your packages. So if you go to package.json, and if you go up here to name, this is actually where you set the name of your npm package. So since this name is already forbidden for 24 hours, I will just rename it to, let's say, L4. StencilJS tutorial, right? And now I can hit npm publish, and it should work. As you see, now it worked with this name. And if I go to npm and sign in, I should see my package being published. So now I'm logged in to npm. I can go to my profile, and it will say packages. And those are some packages that I tried before, just some test packages, but this is the one that I've just published a few seconds ago. And now if I click on that package, I will see a detail page of my npm package. And just like if you've been working with npm before, you're very familiar with this page, so you can add some description. You also have this npm install button right here. But also if you publish an npm package, the npm package will also be available on a CDN, which is called cdn.jsdelivery.net. And if you go here, you will be able to find all publicly available npm packages. Now let me search for L4 StencilJS YT tutorial, and that is available here because I published my npm package, right? And now I can see here the file structure of my package, and I can come here, I can go there, and I can click on that same path that I've used before within my test project. And now all that is left to do is just copy this link right here and switch back to my test project that I've used before. Not that one. I've worked in here before. And now instead of using this path for the source of my module, I will use the path of that CDN that I just copied, right? So I will enter that, and in here I will get the ES module from this CDN right here. So if I save that, and in the meantime I stop the server, so I will have to start my server again. I will go live. It will open up this window, and you can see here that now my button is working again, and I'm using that module from a public free CDN. So that's the way that you can reuse your components that you have built with Stencil within any project. And just to test another project, I will now create a Laravel project, and I will just add my web component from Stencil within that Laravel project as well. So I'm here in my projects directory. I will say Laravel new, and I will call it component test. Now that I have created it, I will cd into my component test directory, and I will open it with code, and I will close this project right here. And I'm using Laravel Valet, so I can just enter the name of my project and add an .test to it, and now I can see my project right here, and I've got my VS Code right there. And to show my web component, all I need to do is go to my welcome.blade in this case, and within the head I can just add the script tag, and add the source to it. Let me switch back to my CDN, copy the path to my module, and now I will close the script tag, and now I can just add my button somewhere here within the body. Let me add it right here. Now I will say L4 button, and I will say button text. It will say click me, close that tag, and now I will switch back to Chrome. And if I refresh the page, you can see right here that my button is available and it has the same functionality that we've implemented before. So it doesn't look very good, of course, but everything is working correctly and as expected. And that is how web components work and how you can reuse them in different projects. So, and I think that is a very, very neat solution to the problem that sometimes you build components that are only reusable within the same project, but you cannot use them across different projects. In the future, I'm planning to create a tutorial where we can build a more complex component just to make use of all of the decorators and all of those lifecycle events or lifecycle methods that Stencil offers. So if you don't want to miss that, make sure to click the like and subscribe. And thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye bye.